Hi, and welcome to the Tattooed Teacher podcast, where we get to know the person behind the professional, going below the surface of what we see. Join with me as I talk with some incredible individuals from around Australia and the globe. My guest on today's episode is Efraim Lerner, an amazing educator, consultant, and a rabbi. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Efraim as much as I did. Well, good evening, good morning, good ever what time of day it is you happen to be listening to the Tattooed Teacher podcast. On today's episode, I have the amazing Efraim Lerner. We met on LinkedIn a number of months ago, or probably at least a year now. So it's great to have you back and chatting. But Efraim, I could do a bio search on you and find out you got a master's in this or a doctorate in that or whatever it may be. But I think what's more important is how you see yourself and how you'd introduce yourself. So for our audience, Efraim Lerner, what's your bio?
Tough question. Phil, it's such a pleasure to be here. For me, I think you've captured it so well as well. Like, we use titles and we can sometimes get caught in our credentials, but who we are as a person sometimes is so much more valuable and represents us in ways like without all the niceties that we give it. So I'll say my name, Efraim or Ephraim, depending how you pronounce it. Former rabbi. So I guess that's quite unique. It came from Australia as well. So different part of Australia to you, Phil, but very different background, I guess, to maybe a traditional educationalist, if there is such a thing. Went into working as a rabbi for a bit and found this deep passion towards the future of education, and have been really blessed and fortunate to be able to connect with incredible educational leaders like yourself who are really thinking about the next stage of education and how we can get the most healthy and sustainable way of giving education to our children, to our students, so they love learning and their passion for learning is not just in the classroom but in their life.
Mate, that is fantastic, because it does come down to a lot of it, and a lot of education is, well, I've got my X credential and Y credential and this credential, so you should listen to me. But as we both know, that's not always the case. You said you were trained as a rabbi, so we're going to get into that later for sure. But you're talking about and we're talking about education, because that's our main audience, is those people who are in education or have a distinct interest in education and educating the generations to come. So, but behind all of that, what was your why to get into what you're doing now?
It's a great question. Another great question. It's one of those questions that it just forces me to think. So I'm saying these words now, kind of to give myself the time to respond. But I think for me the why was I was experiencing education as in the context of the Jewish schools that I was teaching in. I was experiencing it as a student of a rabbinic training program for most of my entire teenage years. And going through that schooling experience, I felt how often was I being spoken at as a student, as opposed to being taken with, meaning included in the conversation. And for me, this passion towards seeing the impact that education could have from the positive and from the negative in my own life, I wanted to be able to give back, and I wanted to make sure that for my brother or now my children, they would have the opportunities where education captured them in their entirety, not just an aspect of them, not just a part of them. And through those people who showed me and continue to show me what education could be, the impact it can have on people's lives, I was shocked that fewer people were interested in going into that profession and were more driven by other things. So for me, I had this yearning to go back into the field of education and give back and to be there and hopefully help with bringing a bit more humanity to what we do day in, day out, and capture the process as opposed to just maybe seeing the results, or become obsessed with the systems as opposed to the people behind those systems.
But that is amazing. I mean, I reckon we could probably press stop and stop recording now and just let people digest that statement. Like that's amazing because just behind it all, you've got your history and the way you've learned and the way you were raised. But then you're talking about how you want it to capture or you want the students to capture the essence, their whole essence in education. You want it for your own children. And congratulations, by the way, on the newest addition to the Lerner family. So,
Thanks so much.
mazel tov to you, my friend.
Thanks.
But you've brought so much into this conversation already, and it's amazing. And I'm just going to sort of take a step back from that because probably like most of the people listening, you've talked about you were in rabbinical training. Now, from what I know, I'm a bit of I sort of tend to geek out a little bit on Jewish history, just with my own faith. I like to learn where things come from. So, and with the Christian faith, it's rooted in the Jewish faith initially. Um, so I love to find, and I love history as much as I hate writing essays and I hated history in school. I love history now. Um, but from my very limited understanding, to become a rabbi is almost a lifelong journey from a very young age. From basically as soon as you can, I guess, read and write, you're in school to become a rabbi. Is that true for that? And is that where your passion for education started?
So I'll go with the second question first. I think my passion for education definitely stems from my experiences training to be a rabbi. And going to your first question, the journey to being a rabbi is ongoing. It's never ending. And that's why it sometimes can feel uncomfortable to say, I'm a rabbi, because to put myself even in the same category as some of the rabbis that I look up to or throughout history, I feel like it's a drop in the ocean to compared to their knowledge, their wisdom, and who they were as human beings. Just these incredible leaders who brought out the best in the people around them. But for me, from a practical point of view, the rabbinic becoming a rabbi is usually a very technical process. It's the process of
Okay.
being, yeah, it's the laws of kosher and knowing those laws. And I guess if we were to zoom back, you mentioned history, like historically, the rabbinic training process was to choose people that were maybe most fit for leadership roles in the community, and they were incredibly knowledgeable and wise, and they were able to be there for other people in a way that maybe others weren't. They had the empathy, they had the emotional intelligence. It might not have used the words that I'm using now then, but it was
Yeah.
it was this it was this sense of being able to be there for the people. And we look at Moses, we look at great leaders in Jewish history, and they share that same quality of humility and devotion to their people. But the term rabbi is quite technical. It's like to get to being a rabbi, it's usually being proficient in specific laws. And if someone's considered a judge, a Jewish judge, it's the laws of matters of courts. So monetary disputes and family disputes, and how do you sort of bring people together, and how do you do that using the Shulchan Aruch, which is the set of laws that were established based on the Bible, based on the Talmud, to sort of to dictate the way of Jewish, and there's many ways of Jewish life, but Orthodox Jewish life as prescribed by the Torah. But there's so many different ways even in there. So I'm sort of oversimplifying a very complex system, but I was deeply fortunate to be able to grow up in an environment where I learnt Talmud from a very young age. I learnt to read Hebrew from a young age, Bible from a young age, like the Torah, and the commentaries around that. And from there, it allowed me to progress. And as I got to my later teenage years, I was able to go to a religious seminary called the yeshiva, and I would study there kind of day in, day out. And I grew up in the part of the Hasidic community, and we would
Okay.
learn Hasidic mysticism from when we were a little older, and we'd do that in the morning, and then we'd learn Talmud pretty much until till late at night. And I got to travel to many different countries, which I was fortunate to travel to. Started off in Australia, my studies, and then moved overseas to Canada, Toronto, Canada, South Africa, New York in America. Just got to travel quite a few different places because of the different schools that were around and are available for me to be a part of, to learn from.
Mate, that's amazing. That's it. It seems that it's a real passion for learning. Now, like just for let's just take religion out of this at this point in time. But it seems that you wanted to learn because you were being taught by people who, one, knew their stuff, but also had a passion for what they were entrusting to you as the new generation. Would that be a true statement?
Definitely would be. And I think if I were to add a little to that, I feel like the people who encouraged me, or what encouraged me internally, that internal motivation to continue doing what I was doing, was the people around me. Being able to see leaders, rabbinic leaders, who exemplified what it meant to be a good human being. And good human beings can look in many different ways. They don't. It's not specifically through that lens. But for me, seeing that and seeing how they treated other people, whether it was from the Jewish faith or it wasn't, that gave me a real sense of this is something that I would aspire to be able to achieve in my own learning. And the beauty of learning something like the topics that we needed for being a rabbi was it's deeply applicable to day-to-day life. So having that knowledge, regardless of whether you're training or working as a rabbi, or it's just knowing the laws of not mixing meat and milk, which is the laws of kosher, and cooking them together, like those, there's so much complexity and nuance, but that affects us in the kitchen when I'm home with my wife and we're cooking a meal. It's practical, and it has a real application to it. Whereas the Talmud can sometimes seem quite, aloof and distant from day to day, but the ability to break it down into the process itself is being valued. And maybe when I mentioned that before, I wasn't aware of this piece, but that seems to be something that is incredibly valuable. It's a lot less about the destination and a lot more about the journey. It's not about getting a certain mark on a test, but it's rather about going through the process of understanding and using those skills to develop your own thinking and to learn how to learn. And if I were to go to what you said, just drawing from something you shared, you mentioned in school you didn't love history as much as you love it now. I'll put it in those words if it's all right. But
Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
and I think that it's common from speaking with friends and family that when you mention school, people have this instant reaction to it, whereas when you mention learning or education, there's a different feeling to it. And how can we bring our school experience to represent our learning experience a bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing I talk to my kids in school all the time. I say, you're here to learn how to learn. You're going to forget basically content that I teach you. That's going to go out the window. But as long as you can learn how to, and you talked about empathy and critical thinking and understanding and listening, those are all tremendous skills that need to be taught. And another thing that you mentioned earlier, you're talking about, just the various training and the people that you studied under, how they sort of had a specialty. There was one in maybe finance, and there was one in law, and there was one in, whatever their passion took them down. Do you think that schooling, in the line of this conversation, do you think schooling has lost that the target of it's all about learning and growing and becoming better, and it's gone to how do I get an A, how do I get into this vocation or that vocation or this university or that. Do you think we've actually lost our path, or education, or what in inverted brackets, education has lost its path to what it actually is there for?
Difficult question to answer, and
Yeah,
I'll I'll tell you why. Because I think ultimately education should be what gives us our love for learning. It's giving us that feeling towards it. But in the past, we've been needing to be able to quantify what we're doing for external expectations. So if a parent wants to choose a school, they'll want to choose a school that's going to give their child the most opportunities. What opportunities in the past do they need? Well, they needed maybe a degree, or they needed a specific qualification, and that would get them specific. With those boxes ticked, they'd be able to achieve specific targets that would then, it was like this almost sequential, stage by stage. If you do this, you'll get to that. And right now, I think when we're looking at the bigger questions surrounding education, whether that's artificial intelligence and the way that jobs will look, whether that's something like our education systems, how they're struggling to cope with the amount of pressure on teachers, whether that's growing interest or understandings of each student's needs whilst increasing the curriculum and having less time. Like, there's all these pressures that we have ongoing in our schools that have been playing towards what people are expecting of what a school could look like. And I think without it being a conscious decision, the difficulties are, as we start to think about what learning is and what we're giving our students, those expectations may matter a little less. And having said all that, though, I do think that fundamentally, if a child loves learning and they've got the tools to be able to face their life with confidence and an ability to be able to adapt under pressure and think critically, they're in a pretty strong position, regardless of what qualifications they have. Qualifications will help, but I think what we're going to start to see, I could be wrong, is this push towards valuing that process a little more, the process of learning and the skills that people can take from learning, as opposed to the end results.
yeah, yeah. Look, I think I'd have to agree with you on that one. And you're hearing it more and more in various commentary that the employers aren't looking for necessarily the degree. They're looking for the attitude, or they're looking for the skill that someone has, and it could be with emotional intelligence, it could be with critical thinking, it could be with their empathy, it could be just a natural gift that they have that suits that particular vocation. So I'd definitely have to agree with you in that education is shifting, but I think it's still got a long way to go. I mean, it was built for purpose many years ago, but purposes change, as you well know. So,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
you were
I think,
mentioning AI. Now, you're yeah, go ahead.
just on that last point you were saying, I think there's also this tendency to you said purposes change, and I think the challenge can be when we've anchored ourselves in such strong expectations of what successful learning is and what the results are, rethinking that, going through an inflection point, going through a change as significant as that. If those cultural familiarities, if we want to call it that, is so deeply
Yep.
ingrained, to rethink that and to really consider that, we can't do that alone, and we need our community around us. And yeah, that's sort of a point that I'll probably touch on later in this conversation, but just something to just flag up.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because we look at schools, and they are communities. They are their own little ecosystem, and every school, whilst its goal, I guess, is the same, they're very, very different. Whether they in Australia or England or America or wherever they might be, Europe, their goal is to help young people learn and to gain skill and knowledge and wisdom and experience. but how they go about it is all very different. What works in one will not work in another, and what doesn't work in one will often thrive in another. So it's a really interesting position that schools and educational institutions have. And do you think that might be one of the biggest challenges in the changes that might be coming? That because everything is so varied and it's such a behemoth, it's very difficult to change.
It's something that is deeply personal, this question, and I'd love to respond. Give me 1 second there. I'm going to move the point. I hope I can cut this one out. You can cut this
Yeah,
one
no,
out.
that's all right.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a deeply personal question, because for me, when I was working in a Jewish school and I was seeing the consultants that were coming in to advise on change initiatives, what I'd often see is they'd come with their, and it wasn't intentional, and I hope it wasn't intentional, but they would come in with their book that worked in the past and their frameworks, and they were detached, and understandably, because they haven't been to the school before, from those cultural nuances, those ways that are so deeply ingrained and a part of what makes that school special. And they were losing that. And at that stage, I was running a sixth form, which is like kind of like in Victoria, it's the VCE, it's the final 2 years final 2 or 3 years of school. And it was my first, I would say, senior leadership position. And what I noticed was seeing these consultants, yes, the change happened, but unfortunately, the change did not last, because the people that it would affect most closely were those that weren't being included in that process. And I think there's this nature. It's for me, the reason why it's so personal is because it's what I do day in, day out, and I'm trying to work on, which is, as a consultant or as a coach, taking a coaching approach to consultancy, to supporting
Yeah,
schools. It's very easy to come in with a set of criteria. We're going to go introduce this new idea, this new initiative, and we're going to tell it to people. We're going to tell them, and they're going to listen. And before we spoke about that, the same idea is how often we introduce a new concept and we say, this is going to be, we're working with you and we're going to tell you what you need to do, or we're going to listen and then tell you what you
yeah,
needed to hear. And we can do that in the classroom. We can do that in multiple environments. But in society, we can often speak at people instead of working with them. And it's difficult if change is implemented from a top-down approach, in the way that, how could this resonate from a long term, from a sustainable piece, if no one's really found this is their change? It's someone else, as a consultant, an external advisor, or a leader, or an individual. This is what they're going to introduce. Whereas if we can bring the community with us, and we can allow for space for the community themselves to question and to ask and have conversations and feel safe doing so, then the changes that we bring on, and that could be as extreme as technology to as simple as changing curriculum. Like, if we're only looking at the perspective of staff, for example, and we're not listening to students, or we're not even listening to staff, or we're listening to staff but we're not listening to parents. So we've got, our community is so diverse, and it offers this deep collective intelligence. And if we can draw from that more effectively, there's more likelihood of us being able to make the change last and be meaningful to those involved. The book, the reason why this is so personal is it's the book that Shane Leaning and I have just written, and we're hoping to publish it in a couple months. But we're just going through the final edits now. But the book itself is based on this idea, which is, our organizations, our schools, are often inundated with external voices, consultants, companies, and all well-intentioned. I don't think anyone's coming in to say we're just going to get as much money and make sure the school just completely collapses because of it. I don't think that's the intention of anyone. Otherwise, they would choose a different profession, because education isn't built around the same sort of financial pools that you have in other industries. But
Exactly. Yeah.
but the difficulty is that we're working in isolation of each other. We've got the school working in isolation of the consultancy firm. The and the reason why is because internally, the moment that there's a big challenge, what's the initial reaction? It's not to look inside and to work as a community to seeing if we have that answer already, if we can work within. It's usually to go to a consultant, which is, as Shane, my co-author and just an amazing educator. What he says is it's the death of organizational confidence. It's what we're doing by we're outsourcing our confidence as well as outsourcing our wisdom by bringing on consultants. It doesn't mean that consultants aren't helpful. They are, and we're very conscious of that as well. Like, it's bringing on external support, but knowing internally when we need that support, as opposed to bringing it on before we know if it's something that we have already in our pantry or in our cupboard, or it's something that we might
Yeah.
need a bit of external advice and guidance for.
Yeah. That's to look at it in that light. It's just got me thinking that what you're saying is that and I've seen it in the past where consultants or whoever has come in, or there's been a change in school leadership, that they've come in and they're going, well, this worked here, so I'm going to implement it here and it's going to work, and you're coming along for the ride whether you like it or not. Get on the bus or get out of the way. All those cliche things, and what I'm hearing, and tell me if I'm wrong, but from your experience and from what it sounds like you and Shane and the research that you've done and the experience that you've had, is that if you are talking to your community and you're actually listening to them and hearing what they're saying, not necessarily making the changes, because you try and please everyone, you're going to please no one, but you're actually allowing the people to be heard. And even if change is made and it's not what they like, the fact that they've been able to voice their opinion, their fears, their worries, their wishes, the transition to change is easier. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I think so. I think I want to also be clear. I'm not saying that there's no room for consultants or expertise. I think there's a space for that, and consultants
Oh, they
are
definitely needed, that's for
there's
sure.
yeah, and I think in specific environments as well that they can allow for those conversations to take place more easily because you've got this culture that's at play with perhaps differences or or distance that's been sort of set, which maybe is harder for someone internally to have those conversations. But I think it might not be easier, but I think what it can allow for change to be is it can allow it to be more meaningful. And in the long term, if we were to take a sort of a more broad look of things, what we find is that the change itself, from our research, what we've seen is that yes, the change will last, but it will last very incrementally. It might last, and there are changes that last for a long time as well. But if there's buy-in, and we don't just use that term lightly, like buy-in as in like we tell you what to do, but if there's
Yeah.
if our people are included in the process, and not just because we have to, but because we want to, they can add value, they can add wisdom, and they've got important perspectives. The perspective of a parent, for example, or the perspective of a student or a staff member or a teacher, like that can cement a lot of what we're doing. And it could be the exact same process of what you had before, but the very fact that you've included people in this process, your community, then there's ownership and there's shared responsibility. And if there's clear guidance as to how you can implement those changes together, and like you said, it doesn't mean having to consider everyone all the time with every single decision and act on every single person's input, because then you're going to have so many different pieces of information that are conflicting. But have those conversations together, mull them out, allow them to be discussed. It's more likely for that change to be there for the future and there to last because people connect with it. It's something that's theirs. It's not someone else's.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I'm looking forward to reading this book once it comes out. I think I think it carries weight because one, you're and look, I've not met Shane personally, but it seems as though you guys are coming at this from people who understand schools, how they understand how the system works, how to best bring change to the community for the better, rather than just change for change's sake.
I appreciate that. I think also it's important to know, like, as a consultant or as a coach, we're only as good as how much we give space for the people we are serving to be able to see their own wisdom. Schools leaders have the wisdom; they wouldn't be in a head teacher's position without it. Sometimes they need a bit of advice and guidance and support, and we're not saying there's no place for that. But I think the most important step for a consultant or a coach is to give space for the leader to see and to recognize they've got that insight available, or to support them to see that insight in themselves in their own context. Because no consultant or coach can ever justify saying, we know all the answers. It's impossible, but they can ask the right questions, and they can give space for the leaders to ask those questions to their community and to have those conversations together.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that just stood out with that what you just said, in the fact that you're there, your position is there is to serve the school, serve the community. So it's got nothing to do with you. You're just the conduit to change, to help the community or the school or whatever it may be, to make the positive change that suits them, and it has nothing to do with you as a coach or consultant. But then you're there to help ask the right questions, or get them probably more importantly, get them to ask the right questions.
Yes, I could not have said that any better. It's giving them the space as well to feel confident in what they already have, and trusting themselves and feeling that they've got this insight that they maybe haven't had space or time for, and allowing them to see that.
Now, do you see that not having the space or not having the time? Do you see that as I guess you've travelled to various countries, not necessarily in the school space or the educational space, but you've probably chatted with various people who have been in schools and the like. But do you find that there's not enough time within the school structure to actually step back, think, ask the question, process it, and then make a timely decision? Do you think there's so much jammed in that they're almost rushed to make a decision? And often, as you know, in life, we make a fast decision, a hasty decision. Often it can be the wrong decision with consequences that we never foresaw.
It's difficult because you're right. I'm very fortunate in the work that I do. I've worked with schools from across the globe, from Australia, South Africa to America to the UK. Across multiple regions. And yes, there's no question about it. And it depends on the school. It depends on the funding. There's a lot of complexities and nuance, as there often is, depending on the environment. But our schools, if we take a step back, schools have often been an environment where we've had time to be able to nurture those relationships initially. And through the learning, that's usually how it's done in the classroom experience. But as we increase our expectations, so our understanding of each student's needs increases, so special education, mental health, we're having to increase our preparation and our time to be able to ensure that we meet those needs. And our curriculums haven't really they haven't really downsized. They've just increased, and the expectations from governing bodies or external regulatory bodies can sometimes add to that pressure. So practically, day in, day out, teachers who, I can speak for myself from my own, and this is anecdotal experience, but also from the research, you've got schools who are adding more. They've got this additive nature, and it's a natural thing to just increase the work that they have, without giving space and time for those long-standing, those longer-term important conversations to take place. But how can we do that? How can we give space? So there's an incredible book by John Hattie, Dylan Williams, and um, oh, and Aaron Hamilton on it's called um, oh my gosh, it's on de-implementation. The name just slipped me. Making room for impact. That's the one.
Yeah.
Um, it's it's the idea that, and they look at the research around different countries, and you have countries in Europe, for example, Scandinavian countries who they have significantly less time in school, both on a day to day, like on their schedule, but also weeks per year, and yet the results on multiple areas, we're not just speaking academic, social and emotional, is at the very top. And how? If you've got the same amount of time, how is it? But the reason why is because the time that they use is so focused and so clearly used for those, those bigger questions that are there. And if there's clarity and there's space and time for those relationships to take place, to move out of that survival mode and move into an environment where we can think, what's our 5-year plan? What's our 10-year plan? And it doesn't mean a 5-year plan with technology or 5-year. Yes, those are important parts of the conversation, but rather what's our goal as a school educationally, and how can we give space to have more deep, meaningful conversations around what we're trying to achieve and how we get the most out of each and every student that's under our care and each staff member. Like the focus is often, like, let's say in schooling, we focus on recruiting staff. But what if we invested more in, and that's a really quick win. You can just every year work on your recruitment, but the longer term piece is on the retention. How do we create an environment, a culture that people want to be there? They've got space to be able to process what they're doing. They have a love for what they're doing, and they've got time to be able to invest in that passion.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. It's getting out of the I can't remember. It's wherever I heard it, but it's about thriving, not surviving. Um, and look, I've worked in some schools where they are like, we work hard, like both staff and students worked very hard, but we did it because there was it wasn't tangible. Even now I would find it hard to put into words, but the culture, we'll put it down to that. The culture of the school was for everyone to succeed, in whatever avenue that was, whether it was academia or whether it was to go to trade school or whether it was sporting or music or the arts or whatever it was. It was just like, that's your passion, that's where you love, let's find a way for you to get there. And the same with staff. You love rowing, hey, there's a rowing club. You love drama, there's a drama club. You love chess, there's whatever it was, there was just that option that was made available. And you had staff, I know there's staff who went through as boys in the school, and then they went off to university, and then they came back as teachers, and then they stayed their whole teaching career. So they spent, like 13 years of schooling there as a boy, and then they come back as a young man, in their 20s, and they've retired in their 60s. So, they've spent the vast majority of their life in an environment because they were able to thrive there, and they felt nurtured, and they felt, I guess, loved, and they had a place. So do you think that might be missing because of the cramming into what is in schools now? Do you think that is missing in many schools, or have you seen that?
I think it really depends, and again, going back to that line, like there's nuance and complexity that it's hard to be able to say, oh, that school had this or that school didn't. What I do notice though is when the relationships are at the very heart of what the school is about, it's easier, and not just playing lip service, but there's a genuine respect from everyone. I mean, staff to students, students to staff, parents, where there's a genuine respect of the shared values that they all have and individual values that they individually have, as well as value to what they each can contribute. So a student who's young doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be told everything. they're thinking for themselves, they've got value to what they can contribute on their own. Those environments which gave a voice to each person in the community and genuinely appreciated it and gave them space to be themselves, those are the environments that I feel they felt more safe psychologically. Amy Edmondson's term, psychologically safe, that idea from her work, like, on creating environments where people could feel vulnerable and they could express themselves, and they felt that their personal goals were aligned with the communities. In those environments, I definitely saw, and this is also again from different research that I've looked at, that working together, and that's the name of Shane and I. The work that we do is under this title, work collaborative, which is like an action, like work collaborative, like let's work together, but also it's a collaborative. We're working. The benefit of all of this is going to be when we come together. Those environments have really sparked the work that we've done, because we've seen and we've been inspired by schools that, like you said, the same child wants to go back to that school as they're older to contribute back to that community that they grew up in. They felt safe there. They felt nurtured. They felt loved. They felt valued. And in those environments, they could really thrive as a human being. And if we can capture that in our schools, I think the change that we're speaking towards, and that could be monumental changes in society, like AI, or it could be something
Yeah.
that's more internal. But how safe do we feel to be able to face something like that? How safe do we feel as an individual and collectively to be able to feel safe, to be able to, and have space as well, like you said, time and space to be able to nurture the process as much as the results.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's such a, I don't want to say yeah, I mean, it's a minefield of how things can work, and what will work and what won't work, and what, we're human, and we all have our little nuances and our idiosyncrasies, and that annoys me or that doesn't annoy me, or whatever it is, and working in a community, that's always a challenge. But you mentioned technology and you mentioned AI. Do you think that is going to have a tremendous impact, or any impact, or what's your, at this point in time, and in its, we all know that artificial intelligence in and of itself has been around for quite a while now, half a century at least, but in its current state, in the generative state that it's in now, do you think that is going to shift education?
I think it could shift aspects of education. I think it's not the tool, it's going to be the way it's used, and that's with everything. I think if a school
Yep.
has deep purpose with where they see AI fitting in, for example, if there's a collective vision to how this ties into their values, this ties into their day-to-day runnings of the school and what they could achieve, I think it could be truly groundbreaking. And I know everyone likes to throw these words out there, and there's this hype cycle, the Gartner hype cycle, and I think parts of what we're seeing is definitely there. There's a lot of hype surrounding AI, but intentional
Yeah.
and meaningful AI, where AI is used not as because we have to use AI, we're going to bring it in, but rather, how can AI help us achieve what we're trying to do? I think there is where it can have a huge amount of value. And I think what we'll see is, unfortunately, schools that have a lack of clarity with where they're using AI and have maybe a lack of guidance or a lack of confidence with how they use AI might just use the AI tools. I think when schools are more comprehensive, they'll, within their approach with AI, they'll have training then and be more literate, and so they're more confident to have those conversations together. But I think if we get under the surface, we dug under the surface, when it's more where AI is thinking, when someone's thinking about AI in a school through a strategic lens or a systems lens, in a way that this could support the infrastructure of what we're doing, and there's a culture around seeing the technology to support the relationships that we have in our schools, as opposed to override or to just to add on, then I think AI can be an amazing tool to be able to allow each student and the collective community to achieve goals that maybe we couldn't have done until now. We had one teacher or one book at the front of the class. It was hard to be able to adapt. That took time, it took energy. But if we can bring it in meaningfully, and each school will know where that would look, and it's the conversations that they'll have with their community, that's where I think it could be a real game changer. And it's kind of why I've been such an advocate for the potential of allowing us to bring out the best of humanity. Because I don't think it's the AI. I think it's forcing us. The AI is forcing us to have those conversations that have been under the surface for forever, and we now need to address them more.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what's the reason for this? If AI can do it, why should we? Or why should we be? Why should students learn this if the AI can do that? And there's all that. As you know, there's all those questions and statements and theories, and there's utopia and dystopia, and the robots are going to take over. But I think it's one of those things where, like you said, with training, with with that phrase, AI literacy, where people are understanding it and how, and I think probably more importantly, when to use it, it creates that opportunity for us to be more human. It helps use, and I mean, I know at this point you've probably had the same experience. Whilst it might do something quicker than we can, it often takes more time to get it to do that than it would if we just had have started. But it's allowing us and giving us that creativity, and I've used it, and it's helped with creative thinking and critical thought and getting a different viewpoint, without having to harass someone at 3 a.m. or in the middle of a lesson and just like, I need to whatever it might be. But it's one of those things where it's the tool to help and aid, but not replace human connection.
Definitely. And I think the difficulty is we can sometimes see from what you've just shared about seeing it sort of dystopian, this like, or like this utopian environment. It's often that these extreme views aren't where it's at. It's usually somewhere in the middle. And I think the difficulty is going to be, from what you've shared, is that the difficulty is firstly breaking that impression in our minds that it's either AI or human. I think seeing them more of a and the same way in our communities, not seeing it as one individual making a decision or another, but rather how can we get the best out of everything together? How can we augment what we're doing and bring out the best of both sides? I think the difficulty is going to be when we think about data security, when we think about context, when we think about those deeply sensitive pieces of information. If AI is used incorrectly and there isn't that guidance and there isn't that deep thought that comes with, and the ethical questions that can come with using a powerful tool like technology like artificial intelligence, it's learning and it's adapting. If we're going to give it deeply personal information, there's a risk of it going into the wrong hands. But at the same time, without that deeply personal or that context that's so specific to each environment, it can be quite shallow, and we can end up spending a lot of time trying to reiterate it or make it more personalized. So it's kind of a catch-22. How can we make sure that we keep the safety and the security and the confidentiality that we need with using something that's deeply contextual? And that role that the human plays, the teacher plays, will be more relevant in that space than ever, because those relationships are the heart and soul of what we're doing. It's not just the head and the technical side. There's something personal that the teacher can and needs to provide in that environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more, because I know, and I've said it on previous episodes, that unless I have a relationship, like a positive relationship with the student in the classroom, they're not going to learn from me. So I've got to build that relationship so that they trust me to go, oh, okay, this guy knows what he's doing, or he understands me, or he's going to listen to me. As far as knowledge and context and everything that technical skills, there's far more on Google and YouTube and various textbooks than I actually will ever know. But part of my role is that I help guide and frame and allow them to use these tools in the correct way that best suits them for their success in that area. So
That's very true.
it's really, yeah, I find it really interesting the way people look at it. On a I talk about AI all the time at home, and it's like the family, they make fun of me, and it's quite funny. The other day, my daughter had to write something, and now she's a very very smart young lady. She's just had a baby, and she had to write a speech for something. But like all of us, she had that blank page, just that freeze. She's like, oh, where do I start? And then she knows I always rabbit on about it, and she goes, Dad, where's your robot? I need your robot to help me start.
That's brilliant.
And I thought it's fantastic because so many people are anthropomorphizing AI. It gives a very human response, which is fantastic. But what I loved about what my daughter said was she gave she called it the robot. So you get your robot to do that. And what I thought was great is that, okay, that's a machine that's going to help me get to where I want to go. It's going to help me start my journey to get me going so that then I can put my personal touch onto what I need to communicate effectively to the audience. So
that's such a good example.
The way? Yeah, and I was going to say, is that how we need to look at it? That it's just that, okay, it's just another tool in our arsenal that we need to know and understand and use, and but we know how to use it safely.
Yeah, I like how you said that. I think there's a challenge with it there, which is we've got AI. The way we've been speaking about it right now is a very practical, like for short-term tasks. I think when it becomes more systemic, where we're using it to sort of, let's say, find out students who may be struggling or they've got, based on their special education needs plans, they can't, or their physical abilities, they might not be able to go to specific rooms. So if that's aligned with, intelligently in a system, imagine that's going to tell us which rooms, which classrooms should these students be, should these students' classes be held in. Like, that's a really intelligent way of using something like artificial intelligence, and it's going to avoid. It could help support students with diverse needs, and we might not have been able to do that in the past. But I think the more it becomes ingrained in what we do, the more care we must place on getting it right. Because imagine we do that, and for some reason it screws up the rooms, and it sends you, which it can do all the time. It's based on patterns, so it can hallucinate, and it sends the student up the third flight of stairs when there's no ramp, or like putting in that, or like there's setting up a map of the school and completely getting it wrong, and for the fire marshals. I don't know if we're trusting on AI for those deeper, more fundamental areas, we need to be really careful with how it's using it. But yeah, I think there's something there with the role that it can play to making us better versions of ourselves, like allowing us to be better versions of ourselves. We've got the capability sometimes, but just the sheer amount of work it takes to just, for example, to create individualized lessons, for example, or to remember every single student's birthday. Imagine you got a notification every single time someone in your class, it's their birthday, and it pops up, and you've got like a little banner that's already preset, and you just need to do that. And when they walk in, there's like their favorite song or something that could be integrated with AI. But I don't know if people are thinking about it in that way. Right now, it seems like it's this conflict where we're heavily critical or highly optimistic, almost blindly optimistic with its capabilities.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is, yeah, some people are just go like they're headlong into it. Um, I use it daily. I use it in school. I don't use it a lot in the classroom. I use it for different things for different age groups. But I don't use it every lesson. I don't use it every week with the kids. But sort of backstep a little bit. We're talking about, safely and using all this sort of stuff. I think the fact that the community in general, and a lot of us educators who are sort of, I guess, early adopters, we're actually asking these questions now rather than 10 years, 5 years, 20 years going, oh, if we only had have asked those questions back then. So I think societally, as I think because of the negative things that we're seeing from social media that was basically just released upon us, which had tremendous and still does has tremendous positivity and positive effects for the community and for various communities, but it also has a tremendous amount of negative effects on various people and communities. But I think the fact that we're asking the questions now, I think that puts us in good stead for the future, and where, at least in education, as far as I'm seeing, where it can actually head. So, we can actually have time in the classroom for the relationships, to build the trust and the rapport and put the humanness back, um, and allow the students to succeed in becoming the best humans that they can be for society.
No, it's such a good point. Like I love how you brought that in as well. It's if because we're asking these questions, it's hopefully going to set the tone for when the next generation, the next couple of years come through, because we're ultimately the conversations that feel that we're having right now, and the listeners are part of as well, is the the impact that it's going to have on years to come. I think more crucial than almost more crucial than ever, because we're setting the seeds that we're going to only see the trees, that are going to grow, all the fruits that are going to come from this years later, but also the dangers that are going to come from this. And I think if we can keep asking those questions, not just the questions now that we're forcing each other to ask, encouraging each other to ask, but also as we go along with it. So, for example, when it's being brought on into a community or when it's being brought on into a school, if we're encouraging those questions to continue to be a part of our conscious thought processes, I think that's more likely for it to be a culture around critical thought when it comes to something as deeply impactful as AI, but also from the positive. Like, can we think about maybe those we might not be including in this?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned like sort of the seeds and the trees, and like that old that proverb is, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is today. Um, so it's, yes, and I think we're looking to when that tree is in maturity by asking the questions and planting the seeds now, so that it's there to protect and to be you know, a haven of rest and shade and shelter and protection, rather than, you know, just a tree sitting in the middle of a field doing nothing. So
Yeah, or thorns, or something that's like that could be dangerous,
yeah,
or poisonous fruit. Like it's guiding it, I think, a little more. And the scary thing with it all is in years to come, like right now, what we're seeing is like it's a race with these large companies. It's free, which is scary because it means it's training on significant amount of data. It's accessible to anyone. There's already issues of deep fakes, and we're starting to see the impact of it. But the difficulty is it's being driven by these larger corporations, which have almost an endless, well, it seems like an endless pool of resources, but it's not endless. We're using resources of humanity and people. So there is that fear that if it's being driven by that, we need the community internally and externally, the wider community like us, to ask these questions and to have these conversations, because then it shows, hopefully will encourage accountability from these larger corporations who are influencing these changes.
yeah, absolutely. And let's hope we can keep doing that, and putting the guardrails in that need to be done, and ask the questions to challenge the reason behind it. Because I mean, it's computer science, and that's what it is. And like most science, it, the people who are creating these things or running the experiments or just going, okay, let's see if we can. It's not so much that they're doing it for any negative reason or for any, okay, well, this is what we can do in the future and we'll rule the world type of thing. They're just going, oh, can we do it? And it's not till after it's done that then all of a sudden they go, oh, hold on, we actually didn't think about that once when it was, when in the reality of what it might be. So I think if we keep asking questions, and I think more importantly that we teach our students how to ask the questions and how to think through the information that's given them, how they can go, oh, is that right? Is that wrong? Or can I look at that elsewhere? Or how do I know that that is true? And giving them the tools to critically think, but also we've touched on psychological safety and well-being, but also the emotional intelligence and the emotional strength to go, no, that's not right. I'm not going to believe it. I might, but I'm just going to go and check it first and be that skeptic that we need to be.
Definitely. Yeah. Again, this is like you've said it so brilliantly. Like just to be able to, like, if I can take what you said, can we do it? Like the company saying, can we do it? I think we should be asking, should we do it? And if we can give agency to our students so they can trust themselves instead of with our learning, which we can often do without realizing it, we can interrupt, we can conclude with what we want them to say or what we want them to think. Without, it's inadvertent, it's not happening intentionally. I think they did research on like the waiting time between when teachers speak and when students speak. And I think it was like 1.1 or 1.2 seconds. Yeah, an amazing educator, Ian Henderson, he mentioned that to me yesterday. And it's this fear that we how often are we giving space for them to be able to make those decisions and the confidence to trust the decisions? Because they're going to be the ones who are going to be facing this more than we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I've been guilty of that. Like a student asks a question, and sometimes it's just because we're pressed for time. We just want to give them the answer rather than lead them to the answer. And I think, I try where I can to, and it drives them crazy, because you go, well, why do you think it's like that? Or how would you do it? Or what's your thought process through it? I mean, I teach, hand skills as well. And when something goes wrong, or something, failure is not always a bad thing as well. We often our best lessons are learnt from failing at something. But it's like when they make a mistake, it's like, well, how did I show you how to do? What was the process that I showed you? And then you tell me the process that you followed yourself. And then it's more important. It's just getting them to think. You see their eyes start to light up and their cogs are starting to turn and they're going, I forgot to do that. I should have done it this way. Oh, and so I'm trying to, when they ask a question, almost throw it straight back at them because they know the answer generally. It's just they've got to find it.
I love that line. They've got to find it. They have it internally. It's just about finding it, and it's going through that process themselves. That's so powerful.
And look, we all know students, and sometimes they just don't listen.
Yeah, I think we're speaking in a very idealistic way. Like sometimes and when there's dangers, and if you're like with what you're doing, there could be like dangerous, equipment or whatever it is that they're using. You can't be like, okay, you can mess around with a chainsaw or like the
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We do need to make sure that we are definitely hands on and just like, hey, no, you can't be doing that. So yeah, there's all that sort of stuff. Hey, Ephraim, I want to be respectful of your time. I know you have you've got a young family that look, I've been there, and thankfully I'm out of that stage. But mind you, sometimes I do miss it because you know exactly where they are, and you've almost got them safe. So, but also you've got a business to run, and you do your consulting, and which we didn't even really touch on. We talked about it, but we talked about it. So I'll have to have you back, and we'll talk more about that. but I want to be respectful of your time and your day. And so I just want to wrap up with just a few questions just to find out. Look, I probably know the answer to at least one of them already, but I'm still going to ask it.
There you go.
But my first one is, what's your favorite drink?
I've just got into ginger ale again. Bundaberg
Ginger
from
ale.
Australia. Yeah, that used to be my favorite, but I've had to settle for, I think it's Canadian Dry. That's definitely been my favorite recently.
Yeah, I was going to say, can you get Bundy rum? Oh, sorry, not Bundy rum. Bundaberg ginger ale in England.
I think I've seen it a few times, but I'm not sure. I haven't seen it in a while. Oh, it's definitely my go-to.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Yeah, the Canadian Dry I've had, not here. I could never find it here. I think it's at Costco now, but yeah, I'll have to double check that one. Now, my next question for you is: do you have a mantra, a quote, a saying that you hold that's helped you through life, or that you hold on to, that when things are, whatever's happening, that you go, nah, that's going to get me through?
There's a few. I would say two that really stick to my mind is, I think it's from Gandhi, is like, be the change you want to see in the world. If you see an issue, or you see a challenge or an opportunity, like try to be that, like represent that, fight for that, because the fact you've seen it is obviously meant to be. And the other is the power of humanity. If we can just be there for another human being, truly be there for them, then to believe in what they're capable of, and to be able to allow them to be the best version of themselves, there's no way that we can stop them from being the incredible person that they are.
No, I love that. I love that. Yeah. Yeah, if you can, give that person the agency and the trust to see them, to let them see themselves as you see them, I think is important.
I think that's a better line. I might use that one instead.
Hey, it's all yours. It's all yours.
Oh.
Now, is there a challenge that you have for anyone listening today? Could be a simple one. It could be it could be quite hard, but just a challenge to throw out there to people listening.
I think if it's an educational leader or someone who's responsible for an organization, I think what I would ask them, or a challenge that I'd give them, is, when was the last time that you gave space for those who are under your care to feel heard? It's a question from our upcoming book. It's the first question, but it's a challenge for them to reflect on. It's not to us, to give a direct answer, but to think about when they were fully present, when they gave value to the other person for both their insight, their wisdom, but also, regardless of their role, who they are as a person, what they can bring, and breaking some of those perceived ideas of that person. And if the answer is yes, I do that all the time, does that show in your actions?
Yeah, that's a tough one, isn't it? That's a tough one. Because I'm sure that in your experience, you've had people who, when you're having a conversation with them, that they are 100% present, and they're not only listening to you, but they're also hearing what you're saying, and they give you that time and that space to be heard. So yeah, that's a tough one. That's an absolute tough one.
I don't
Now,
think it's something that you can do all the time, especially like we spoke about with the constant pressures that we have. But once in a while, just to think about that, sometimes I think it could be really helpful. And it's something I aspire to as well. I wish I'd do that more often.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, a challenge for both of us, and for those listening, that's for sure. Now,
Definitely.
this is the question that I'm pretty sure I know the answer to, but it wouldn't be the Tattoo Teacher podcast if I didn't ask you, do you have any tattoos?
No.
So that's part of
So,
my my little Jewish history geeking out.
my brother does there, and I don't know if that counts, but we were speaking about it. He got my dad had a pickle company, and he got a pickle tattoo. So
Oh,
I hope it's comfortable me saying that, but yeah. So I think he's covered it for both of us.
that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Which pickle company?
It was called Lerner's Pickles. It was in. I think they shipped it around Australia. My dad had a little company, family business.
Oh, nice, nice. I probably would have seen it on the shelves then.
Yeah, you might have. You might have. It was in Queensland. It was in New South Wales. So it shipped
Yeah,
around.
if it was in Sydney, I would have seen it for sure. So,
Oh.
and last but certainly not least, if people want to get in contact with you, hear more about what you're doing, see what you're doing, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
So LinkedIn has been since Phil, we've connected through LinkedIn. LinkedIn has been my go-to
Yeah.
over the past year. So if you want to reach out, my name's Efraim Lerner. I'm sure it will be included in the notes to the show. The other way is the work that I'm doing with Shane is there's a website for that called Work Collaborative, like together,
Yep.
www.workcollaborative.com. And you can also check out the consultancy website, but it's interconnected. So you can check that out on my LinkedIn, but it's Brian, the name of the company, in paying homage to my dad's pickle business, Brian. I just bringing out the best of what's already there. So yeah, that's the
Oh,
best way to
nice.
reach out. But Phil, thank you so much for this. It's such an amazing opportunity to spend time to speak and to listen and to learn and to share.
No, Ephraim, I must thank you. It's been fantastic to get your insights, to learn a bit more about you, and just your understanding and your why for where you are. And I look forward to seeing from where you are to where you go. So that's one of my things. So I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. You have a wonderful day. Enjoy that new family of yours, and the joys and the well, just the joys that they bring.
Thanks so much, Phil. It's such. I'm not sure if this is like included in the recording, but we'll make sure to keep it out. But thank you, seriously. I think what you're doing for education and what you're representing, giving a teacher's voice, like just being able to bring like the voice of an educator, someone who deeply cares about what it is. Like it's so clear. You ooze authenticity in who you are, and to have friends like you is what makes this field so special. Genuinely.
I truly appreciate that. Thank you so much, and I'll work out in the post edit if I leave that in or not.
You can include it if you want, but yeah, it's you can use it as like a review if you want. Something like that.
Absolutely, I'll get the transcript and copy and paste that one. No, look, Ethan, thank you so much, my friend. Have a wonderful day, and we will talk again real soon.
Thanks so much, Phil. Looking forward. Thanks so much.
See ya.
Thank you so much for listening to the Tattoo Teacher podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and found it insightful. If you like what you heard, it would mean so much to me if you could either like, follow, and subscribe to whatever platform you are listening on. The music was by DJ Fruit Salad. Thanks again for listening. Stay cool. Be blessed.